So today's topic, today's webinar is going to be on what to do if your multifamily deal operator goes dark or missing or just stops responding, and also how to avoid these bad deal sponsors. Because a lot of times they're hard to pick out in the beginning, but I'm going to give you some tips and some things to think about and to try to do before you invest your hard-earned money with an operator to make sure that it actually goes well and goes smoothly. So we're going to dive into a story that I heard recently about a deal operator going dark. And then we're going to go to how to protect yourself when something like this happens to you, and kind of combining that with the next one, which is some steps to take to avoid getting into bad deals or into these deals with some bad sponsors. And then the legal steps that you can take or that you should take when something like this happens to you. And then we're also going to dive into some things to watch out for when you invest your hard-earned money with a deal sponsor. And as always, a few little ad-libbed things in there, which is why I always put in there and much more. Because I always, as I'm talking through things, think about various things that I can actually talk on further and elaborate a little bit. And so that's what we're going to dive into today. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a background knowledge about myself. On my screen here, you can see I am one of the managing partners. Nope, not from the beautiful galleries of photographers of a company, a multifamily syndication company called passiveinvesting.com. So you can see this page right here, and some of the properties that our particular syndication group has acquired. If you are interested in joining us on some of these future opportunities, I would invite you to do that. You can go to our website, just passiveinvesting.com here, and then you can fill out this form. You can fill out this form to the right, or you can click on this Join Passive Investing Club. When you fill out this form and submit that, my assistant will reach out to you and get you scheduled to speak with me over the phone about possibly joining us on one of our future opportunities. So enough about that. I want to also talk to you a little bit about the Multifamily Investor Nation. If you're not plugged in yet, make sure you get plugged into the Multifamily Investor Nation. The Multifamily Investor Nation Facebook group is a closed Facebook group, and you have to request to be accepted into it. We do not accept everybody, but there is a questionnaire that you fill out, and I will include this into this link there, right into the chat box there. If you're watching this afterwards in the recording, there's probably in the description somewhere a link to be able to join the closed Facebook group. But when you join that, that's where we continue the conversation from our weekly webinars. And so in the next couple of weeks, I've got some good people that I've actually asked to join us. So we're going to be having some good conversations and some interviews with some pretty high-level people. So make sure you stay tuned to that. And also make sure that you whitelist our email. So my email, dan@multifamilyinvestornation.com, is the email you should whitelist. That's usually where most of the emails that we send out come from. We use a system called MailChimp to do that. So make sure that you whitelist that so you get the information about the recording from this particular episode of the webinars, but also from our future webinars that we are doing as well. So let me talk to you a little bit first about the story that I heard recently about the deal operator that kind of went dark. So about a year and a half ago, I'm going to make sure that I keep the people involved anonymous, so I don't to avoid any issues legally. But there's a deal operator that was in the Southeast that had not done very many deals, but had a deal that they had put together, and they were raising I think it was right at about $700,000, somewhere around in there. And the two people that I'm aware of that are part of this particular syndication, one had invested $100,000 and the other one had invested $200,000, and the communication process throughout the entire deal was a little bit lacking. And then there started to be some, once they got into the deal, there started to be some cash flow issues. And so they weren't getting distributions, and they started to follow up with the operator, and the operator was nowhere to be found. So they would reach out to them, they wouldn't call back. And it was one particular person that was involved with this syndication. It wasn't like a large group or anything. And the property still is in existence. It's still performing, but there's been no distributions. And since they closed on the property, the main operator and sponsor has now brought on another like $4 or $5, maybe $600,000 in additional capital investments into the syndication from other members. And there are usually inside of various operating agreements the ability for the manager to be able to bring on additional members, but so it's not like it's a completely wrong thing to do. Our group has never had to bring additional members on post closing, but that's definitely something you'll want to make sure you ask your operators, that if they do bring somebody on, are they going to be, would they let you know about that, or whatever the case may be? Because usually when you bring on additional operators, you're diluting everybody else's shares, because you only have a certain number of shares that you can give out. And if you add on more shares, then you're diluting everybody else's percentage or equity into the actual project or deal as well. They might be in a different capital stack, different section of the capital stack, or various things like that. But this particular story, they brought on some additional ones, and then you couldn't get a hold of the main operator to ask any questions. They weren't getting any status updates on the property and how things were performing and how things were being done. And so they finally actually were able to get the guy to call them back. And they finally got on the phone and they said, yes, if you want to just get out, then we'll just buy you out or whatever. And they'll just close it. They'll just, set a closing date. Well, they set a closing date, and the closing date came and went. Nothing, they couldn't get a hold of the operator again, the sponsor. And then a week or two later, he finally called back. Oh, yes, it's still my legal team, still the attorney. And they're set another closing date. Well, guess what? That closing date came and went. Nothing happened. Same thing. It happened 3 times, and then the guy just went completely dark. You couldn't get a hold of him. You can't reach out to them. You can't email them or text them or anything. And it's been quite the struggle, because this syndication group now has, between these two guys, $300,000 worth of their investments, and they're not seeing a return off of it, and they can't get their capital back. So they're kind of in this like quandary where they just feel stuck. And so today we're going to talk about, first, how to protect yourself and how to avoid some of these bad deal operators. And they're not really bad deals, right? Because the deal might be okay, but it's just the operators that aren't handling these deals properly, which can cause the deal to go south. So first thing I would suggest that you do from a passive investor standpoint, getting into one of these deals, is you need to make sure that you read the private placement memorandum, including the operating agreement that usually is accompanying the PPM. Read those things very carefully to understand your legal rights if something like this happens. And in this particular situation, it was that they had to go through like 2 or 3 levels of arbitration or mediation before any type of legal action could be taken against them. Or there had to be a certain period of time that went past before they could seek legal action if they were non-responsive. But a lot of times there's language in there that you need to be familiar with, so that if for some reason something does happen like this, what kind of recourse that you need to be able to take with this. So obviously, arbitration is the number one thing that you'll usually see listed in these various operating agreements, but you also want to make sure you understand where these investments are incorporated as well. And most of them, whatever state the property is in, is usually the state of incorporation of the single purpose entity that is created to actually hold the entity. The next thing you should do is to kind of help protect yourself and avoid some of these bad deal operators is partner with people that and then also check their reputation in the market. And you might ask yourself, well, how do I do that? Well, there are places like Bigger Pockets. There are places like, Facebook groups that you can go online and ask people, if you don't know people personally in the multifamily syndication space, say, hey, what do you think about this group? What do you think about this particular person? And what kind of reputation do they have? Do they have a good reputation? Is it bad? Do they have no reputation at all? And if they have no reputation, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but that just doesn't really help you in kind of moving the needle as to whether or not they're a good group to be able to partner with. And so one of the things I always talk about is that most investors do not invest unless they know, like, and trust you. And the number one thing they have to do is they have to know you. And so that's also one of the reasons why a 506B as in Bravo offering, you have to have a prior existing relationship with them. You have to have met them at a conference. You have to have, been emailing back and forth, or you have to have made phone calls with them. You have to have some relationship with them. And I think it's good just from a passive investor standpoint to have those checks in place to make sure that you know the people that you're actually putting your money to work with. I do investor calls on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I get these kind of questions all the time about how tell me more about your group and what you do and the types of investments you look for, the type of communication you provide, the transparency that you provide. And I like getting those questions because I know our group does a really good job with this. We're very good with our transparency. We're very good with our openness and our communication. And I think that's one of the things that you have to do is you need to ask each group that you are potentially partnering with, what kind of transparency do they have? How often are you able to look at the financials? How often are the communications on the property? Our group does monthly communications with each one of the investments that we have. So by the 14th of every month, we send out an update to our investors that are in each one of our projects that we're in, so that they know the occupancy stats on the property. They know how the renovation plan is going, what we're doing to maintain occupancy, various things that the property management company has put into place. And we give those updates on a monthly basis and also provide pictures sometimes from the renovations as things are being done. And it helps these investors know that their investment is actually still out there. It's still working for them. And then we also do monthly distributions. And there's a couple of reasons why we do monthly distributions. Number one is that we want to make sure that we have cash flow as an investor, because our group, each one of our managing partners, we have 3 of them, myself, and then there's 2 others. We are all investors alongside of our investors in each one of our deals. And so we like cash flow. So that's one of the reasons why. But then the other reason is that from a business perspective, I've seen some groups in the past that when they do quarterly distributions, they don't even look at the financials, but like once a quarter. And you don't want to be getting caught into a group that only looks at their numbers on a quarterly basis. In my businesses, we look at the numbers on a weekly basis to make sure that if we need to pivot or change or modify something, we can do that. Instead of waiting quarterly, we do that on a weekly basis. But our monthly distributions allow us to make sure we always are constantly looking at that cash flow number to see, is there enough cash flows to make distributions this month? And then you can make those distributions based on the cash flows. And so I feel like it's very important for a group to be able to do those distributions on a monthly basis. And some people might say it's a lot of work and a lot of hassle, but honestly, it's not for the reward that you actually get for it. Plus, the property management companies are the ones, at least with our group, they're the ones that actually are doing those distributions. We give them the spreadsheet of who gets what type of distribution, and they handle making those distributions for us so that we do not have to handle that. So they might not like doing it on a monthly basis, but I'm not really concerned about, reducing their workload. I mean, we've already negotiated on our property is a pretty low percentage rate. I know a lot of you have probably seen 7, 8, 9, 10% on some of your assets, and we've negotiated down 2.5% and sometimes at 2.25% on some of our assets for property management. And it's because of the size of our portfolio and various things like that help us in those negotiations. The next thing here is about, I think it's a good idea to have multiple partners involved in the actual syndication, meaning at least probably 2 or more. So when this particular situation, in this story, there was only one person. And so there was only one person to be calling on, and that was being held accountable. And when you only have one person, it's easier for them to hide. And so if you want to try to get involved with a group that they can't hide as much, then find somebody who has multiple partners so that you could always reach somebody. And then of those main people, try to get their personal contact information. I had just before the call here, I had gotten off the phone with one of our potential investing partners, and after every single one of my phone calls with our investors, I tell them, I said, I'm going to send you a text message with my contact card so you can have direct access to me directly. And on that contact card is my office address, so they know exactly where I am. I'm here in Columbia, South Carolina. It also has my phone number on there, my LinkedIn page. I mean, it has all the contact information that they would need to be able to get a hold of me. And I let them know I want to be as open and transparent with you about our investments as possible. So if you have any questions about our projects or anything like that in the future, this is my personal cell phone number. I want you to call me, text me, email me, whatever you need to do, and I want to make sure I'm there for you. And we do the same thing with our other partners. If somebody wants to reach out to one of our other partners, they're available. They're available via phone, email. We'll give all that information out, and we want to make sure everybody has that because it makes them feel more comfortable with the investment that they're getting in. But getting that personal contact information of all the partners is important, and I would say to have at least 2, if not more, partners. I don't like to have more than about 5 people in a partnership as far as the main operators in a deal, because then you get too many cooks in the kitchen, if you will. But it's definitely important for us to when I'm looking for other investments to put my money into. I want to make sure there's multiple partners involved to avoid this type of situation, and also have their personal contact information. All right. We talked about distributions. We talked about transparency and communication. Now, what happens when you find yourself in this situation? Who do you call? Okay. That's what the big question you have to ask yourself is, do you call your SEC attorney? Do you call a corporate attorney? Do you call a real estate attorney? Like, who do you call to how to figure out where the next steps are in trying to get your money back, right? And do you file a complaint with the SEC? So the easy answer to this is you do not call your SEC attorney, because they will just turn you away and give you maybe some recommendations to some local corporate attorneys, because at this point in the juncture, it's a corporate issue. So you would call a corporate attorney, and then they would want to have access. You want to have a corporate attorney that is based in the market where your asset is located, because that's usually where that single purpose entity has been created for it. That's what you're investing in, is that particular entity. So make sure that you have, don't make sure, but if this does happen to you, you'll want to make sure you know what state that property is in, so that you know the state of a corporation, and then you can reach out to a state level or a state level attorney, corporate attorney in that area, and then they'll want to have access to your PPM and operating agreement and kind of see how things are structured and set up from an agreement standpoint, so that they know how and know what legal steps to take, whether it be calling for arbitration or mediation and getting to the next level of being able to file whether there be some form of a civil suit or whatever. And then at some point down the road, there will be a certain point in time where that corporate attorney will likely say, well, we also need to file a complaint with the SEC regarding this particular entity, so that this doesn't happen to somebody else in the future. So, all right. So those are all the things that I had to cover with you today. Hopefully it gives you a good kind of knowledge of who you should be investing in, the types of people you should be looking for, but also some things to do and to look out for when you have something like this happen to you, and what would be those next steps. So that's all I have for today. If you have any questions, you can certainly type them into the chat box there or in the Q&A box, and I'll be glad to get to a couple of them if you guys have any questions. If you don't have any questions, and that's perfectly fine as well. We should be posting and releasing the next webinar. That will be next week, here in the next probably 1 to 2 days. I have a trip that I have to do tomorrow to Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'll be back, just flying out in the morning and flying back in the afternoon, just checking on a property out there. So no questions are coming in here. So thank you guys so much for your attentiveness and your participation. Look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. And until then, hope you have a good rest of your day.